Good morning. My name is Daniel Ortiz, and welcome to Policy Matters Now. Today's discussion is about the American Rescue Plan and you. This is the fourth in our five-part series about how federal policy can make a positive difference in our communities and our lives. Now, at Policy Matters Ohio, we push for a more prosperous, equitable, sustainable, and inclusive Ohio for everyone. And we wouldn't be able to do that without support from community members like you. So thank you all so much. And thank you for joining us today. You may be joining us on Facebook, on YouTube or Twitter, whichever platform you're on. Please sign up for our newsletter and like, follow, and subscribe to get updates. So today's conversation, we'll talk about the American Rescue Plan and the People's Budget. And we are joined by an awesome panel of experts. We'll be joined today, as you can see, by Tammy Lunin, the Caring Economy Organizing Director at Ohio Organizing Collaborative, Wendy Patton, Senior Project Director at Policy Matters Ohio, Taylor Pennington, Community Organizer and Activist from Lima, Ohio at Ohio Organizing Collaborative, and Will Petrick, Budget Researcher at Policy Matters Ohio. Now, today is an exciting day for many reasons. It's sunny and not too hot here in Northeast Ohio. But for those of us up here, President Biden is visiting Cleveland today, and he'll be talking about policies that invest in our communities, policies like the American Rescue Plan Act, as well as proposals like the American Jobs Plan and the American Families Plan. And it's important that we grow the conversation on what these policies could mean for communities like ours. But before we dive in today, I'd also just like to share a little bit of background on why we're doing this live stream series. In addition to providing great information, with today's conversation, you can also access prior sessions either on the platform that you're watching this on, or I think we'll put a link to an archive of the previous sessions in the chat. The initial goal behind this series was really to grow this conversation and reach people who were unaware of the details of the American Rescue Plan. We set this goal because at its core, your voice matters. And we think it's important that big policy proposals come with transparency and equitable engagement to all of our communities. Because we need a just recovery that centers all of us. Now, the $1.9 trillion in the American Rescue Plan is an opportunity for just that. And Ohio will be getting a lot of resources. We'll get $12 billion. Our state government will get approximately $5.4 billion, and another $6.6 billion is going to cities and counties. And that's exciting. I think, many of us know that's a large amount of money. There are people who want to build resentment toward our government right now and distract us from seeing the opportunities that we have, especially when investments like that are not squarely focused on taking care of a well-connected and wealthy few. And they try to keep us divided across lines of race, class, and geography. And now they're trying to wage a culture war to distract us and keep us off our toes. And these folks hope that you and your neighbor fail to see that we can all thrive when we invest in all of us, no exceptions, all of our communities. We hope that you as viewers today and talking with folks in your community, see the role that advocacy plays in how resources are distributed and how we set priorities in the state budget. Government can play a positive role in people's lives. We firmly believe that. But government cannot do that alone. And it's important to understand that we all have a role to play here. So please do help us grow this conversation. Talk to your neighbors, and together we can connect the dots. So join us, and throughout today's panel, please ask questions through this live stream, and feel free to comment on prior live streams. We'll be monitoring those and trying to get you responses. But for today's conversation, we may be responding to you directly in a direct response or a comment on the chat. We also hope to have some time at the end of the conversation with our awesome panel to allow for folks to respond to some of your questions. So please do share those. And with that, let's get this conversation going. Now, I have an introductory question, and everyone's going to get the same question. Governor DeWine announced his plan to end coronavirus health orders in Ohio on June 2nd, and that's coming up fast. That's next Tuesday. Now, if you could tell local elected leaders what's at stake or share a lesson people in our communities should take to heart before they begin to engage after the health order ends, what would it be? I'm going to go first to Taylor.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you for welcoming me onto this panel. Thank you guys for putting this space together and all the great work that you guys are doing at Ohio Policy Matters. So first, I would like to address the elected officials and what they can do here in Lima, Ohio, to make sure that we are keeping the community safe as we reopen and get to some form of normalcy, whatever that looks like. There is still a large number of people, especially within low-income communities, Black, Brown, and Indigenous folks in Lima who have not been vaccinated. There needs to be a large investment put into those community areas to make sure that there's testing, and to also make sure that the vaccinations are accessible to people who may not be mobile and may not be able to get to facilities to have testing and have their vaccinations done. There also needs to be follow-ups to make sure people are continuing to have access to even get their follow-up shots and that sort of thing. I've seen a lot of pop-up shops, which are, I believe, great ideas. However, some of those people aren't able to follow up to get their next dose. So those things need to be addressed. What I would like to say to citizens as we reopen, kind of a lesson, speaking to a humanity space, is I think the pandemic really showed people our innate strength, what is in all of us to really survive. I think that we have shown innovation and creativity in an amazing way amongst ourselves. So as Ohio reopens, I would just like to encourage people to continue some of those innovative ways of socializing. I know I speak for many people who are just completely burned out on Zoom. I get it. However, again, as I spoke to earlier, there's still a large number of people who have not been vaccinated. There's still a large number of people who are at risk, children and elderly people. So as my grandmother would say, common sense is free. Just use your good judgment as you are going out into these spaces, especially large social spaces, to make sure everybody's safe, continue to social distance, and continue that good hand hygiene that everybody put an emphasis on that should have been done prior to COVID. So just some of those things to keep in mind.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Taylor. And I love that. I think thinking about the wisdom from a grandmother, I'm hearing that voice right now loud and clear. So thank you for that. Also, I want to shout out, I think it's Nichelle Daniels, who's engaging with us in the chat. So thank you so much. Please continue to tag people. Also, please feel free to ask questions. But next up, same question going to Tammy. So again, with things opening back up, and again, I actually misspoke, not next Tuesday, next Wednesday is June 2nd. What would be the thing you would tell local elected leaders, or the type of lessons that, you know, our community should take to heart? Tammy.
Thank you so much for this opportunity, Daniel. You know, as we transition back to life without restrictions, I believe it's important to remember that families are still rebounding, and they still need support to remain stable. Most families don't operate with a safety net. We should be supporting families as well as the workforce behind the workforce, which is so essential to recovery. Childcare. And over the past few months, you know, I've talked to providers across the state of Ohio, and a lot of their stories are similar. Childcare providers are struggling to stay afloat with lower enrollment rates and less women in the workforce in Ohio. You know, I've talked to, you know, one provider in particular that shared a story around how, she had to take herself off the payroll in order to keep her teachers in her center during the pandemic. So she had to take herself off the payroll and essentially apply for unemployment. So we want to make sure that people have the resources, they have the funding that they need to keep childcare stable as well as to keep families stable. I think that's something that we need to continue to remember, that although we're going to be transitioning out of the restrictions, people are still recovering, and we haven't gotten there yet. So today, I would just want to call on the elected officials in Ohio to continue to support families with all of the different resources, including SNAP benefits, Medicaid. We want to make sure that folks are able to recover in a way that's equitable, in a way that is helpful to families and keeps families together.
Thank you so much for that. That was so on point. I agree with you 100%. Great advice. Now, same question for you, Wendy. Oh, you're on mute.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. And I'd say our first two panelists have, I echo their sentiments. Taylor said, get the health care to those who still need it. Make sure that you have vaccinations and contact tracing and testing for people who have not been vaccinated. This virus is not over. It's less than half of us are vaccinated. Children are not vaccinated. We have a way to go before we're out of the woods. What Tamara said about supporting people who still struggle, especially essential workers, this virus is not done with us. The pandemic and the recession are not over. And as much as, the good news, I think politicians always want to have good news, but the fact of it is they have to keep working, as our panelists have said. I would encourage local officials to strengthen their public health systems. Ohio ranks, I think it's second lowest amongst all the states in state funding for public health, and as a result, because many of our local communities have struggled for funding themselves with low property values and low incomes, we have very weak public health functions in many communities and many counties. Luckily, the American Recovery Act funds that we're talking about today, the rescue funds, will help them do this. But as we reopen, during an ongoing pandemic and recession, got to pump money into strengthening our public health function for the immediate needs and to lay the groundwork for a healthier future.
Thank you so much. So well said. Will, what is your thoughts and what would you share with elected leaders and community members?
Thanks all. So my name is Will Petrick. I'm also with Policy Matters Ohio. Thank you so much, Daniel, for helping organize this, and just thanks to everyone for joining us today. I think first, just in terms of a lesson that I've learned through this experience, is it's really simple. We need each other. I was listening to a podcast just a day or two ago, actually, that talked about how all of us are, we're on screen right now, right? Like we're on Zooms, but we're not making real eye contact with each other. I'm trying to look at my camera so you can see me, but I can't see you. So this does something to our health and well-being. And I know personally, I've struggled a lot with isolation, and I'm just really, the lack of contact with friends, the lack of contact with family. I'm really looking forward to just being with people and being social again. So that's a big lesson of just we need each other. But I think that goes back also to our state, our budget, our communities. We need each other to do all the things that all the other speakers talked about. Make sure that people have high quality education, have access to childcare, food and housing, all those basic needs. That's something that we as a society, we have the resources for, but we don't have the political will. So it is up to all of us to really make those things happen. And I think one of the lessons learned for local, state, and federal lawmakers is actually my colleague put out a report a while back on lessons from prior recessions. And one of the things that research really points to is we need to keep our foot on the gas. We need to continue these investments in people. We still have the latest census data, the household pulse survey said 1 in 4 Ohio adults are struggling to meet their basic needs. That's nearly 2 million people across the state worried about how to pay the rent or pay for food or pay for medicine. So we need to continue to invest in people, invest in communities, if we really do want to have this recovery for all Ohioans, regardless of where they look like or what they look like or where they live. Awesome.
Well, I don't think I could have said it any better than any of y'all today. I think this is, really an exciting moment for many reasons. And I think how we continue to move forward into this moment, hopefully pulling together and maintaining and growing more solidarity, pushing for more transparency from our elected leaders and continuing to engage across communities is going to be so vitally important. Now, with that, I really want to just keep this conversation going. And leading off today, my colleague, Wendy Patton. First, thank you so much for being such an all-star recurring guest on this series of live streams and for all the work that you've done or just anchoring our analysis of the American Rescue Plan. Now, your research on the Rescue Plan started back with a report in April on how we could make the most of this historic investment. Now, given recent developments and statements from local government officials, what could be done to do the most for our hardest hit communities and people? Wendy.
Thanks, Daniel. I think we'll hear a lot about that from our panelists today, but I'll start by saying that the American Rescue Plan is really about rescue. As we said, as the show opened, the COVID pandemic and recession are not yet over. Many people still struggle. Many people are still ill. Using these funds for the rescue is of paramount importance. First, to make sure that the virus is controlled and mitigated through contact tracing and testing. Then for recovery, to help people who still struggle, the quarter of all of Ohioans who are having difficulty paying the rent and putting food on the table. The third element that the American Rescue Plan lays the groundwork for is an equitable rebuilding so that we are stronger and the people hurt the worst in this pandemic recession get some help, get some relief, and we build a society that people suffer less in. And so for our local officials, it's paramount that they use this money as directed in the interim regulations to lay the groundwork for that. Now, I hear from our colleagues in cities across Ohio of recommendations. Some in city council think that the Rescue Act money is like the last federal stimulus bill. Well, we can fix our roads and bridges. We can do some downtown beautification. We can help some projects. We can help attract companies. That is not what this money is for. This money is to help people who have been impacted the most and communities that are still struggling. And so I want to emphasize that what's really important now is to use the money to reach out to people in communities of low income, Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities to do planning for the kinds of public services they need, the excellent school services they need now to recover and in the future to build a brighter opportunity, the housing, the social determinants of health needed in all of our communities. This money is for planning out, for addressing problems in communities, for helping us recover, and to plan how we can invest the additional federal money we look forward to and that President Biden speaks of today in Cleveland. the American Jobs Act, which will bring infrastructure money, which can help with downtown beautification and fixing of roads and bridges, and the American Family Act, which will address some of what Tamara spoke of, the need for childcare and taking care of childcare workers and other essential services that keep our families intact. There's also some forbidden uses of the American Rescue Act money. They cannot be used for cutting taxes. Yeah, there's money coming in to help communities on the local level make sure that they don't have to lay more people off and that they can actually rehire some of the people that were laid off last year. Thousands and thousands of public sector workers were laid off last year. These monies cannot be used to backfill for pension funds that have been underfunded for too long. They are not to be used for road and street repair, although they can be used to assure clean water and broadband. They can't pay the share of funding for matching funds to draw down federal dollars. They're to be used in the community for rescue, recovery, and rebuilding. Back to you, Daniel.
Excellent, Wendy. Thank you. And I guess as a follow-up, one, thank you for outlining how these funds should be used. And I guess in terms of thinking through, what this could mean, this investment could be a real giant jump start to a people's budget. So if you could maybe talk a little bit about that and talk about what should those investments be for a people's budget.
Thank you, Daniel. We entitled this session, The People's Budget and the American Rescue Plan, because the people's budget that we're engaged in together with my other panelists from the OOC and organizers across the state address the pressing needs for investment in Ohio's people and communities in all places. There are 7 demands of the people's budget, and they all could be addressed through the American Rescue Act funds. The Rescue Act can give us a jump start there. We demand in our people's budget a quality education for all students, an excellent public school in every zip code with professional educators and cutting edge technology. Ohio has the resources to do that and must do it. Our educational system has been funded unconstitutionally for 24 years. We need to turn that around in this state budget, and the American Rescue Act plans can help us build better. We demand safe communities in all communities with an end to policies based on mass incarceration, racial discrimination. New forms of ensuring public safety and health in communities are desperately needed, and that's the second demand of the people's budget. These monies, the interim regulations on the American Rescue Act funds specifically say that these funds can help people who suffer from domestic violence. It can help with mitigate community violence and improve safeties in our community. We demand dignity for all people. No one should go without food or shelter or basic needs. The state of Ohio has funds to do that. The American Rescue Act funds are designed to ensure dignity for all people as we recover from the pandemic and the recession. We demand stability for families. And we all live and work in a turbulent economy. Plants close, pink slips fly. Our source of livelihood is all too fragile for the needs of our families. The American Rescue Plan has done a great deal to provide for families and to help with stability, with stimulus checks and enhanced unemployment compensation. To our great concern, we see Governor DeWine ending some of the supplemental unemployment compensation far before people's needs end. But one of our demands is that stability through excellent administration of the unemployment system be upheld and strengthened. Many people waited far too long to get their unemployment insurance checks when jobs were lost in this pandemic. That needs to be fixed. The state needs to fix it. The American Rescue Act money can be spent on information technology to correct the system now and to build it better for the future. All right, so our fifth demand is better care for the caregivers. We depend on child care workers to take care of our kids during the day. We depend on home health care workers. We depend on many workers who are funded by the government but are paid poverty wages. We want to see a living wage and good benefits for all of our caregivers that are essential to our families and to our economy. Our sixth demand is a healthcare system that we can depend on. Health is the first wealth for any human being. We have the state of Ohio expanded Medicaid, so the poor working people get healthcare coverage now. Legislators have continually chipped away and tried to put up barriers to that. So we demand an unfettered and available, excellent healthcare system for all people in Ohio. And finally, the seventh demand is, how do we fund this? We need to fund it fairly, and we need to fund it sufficiently so that we can have good schools, safe communities, dignity for all people, stability for our families, caregivers who earn a living wage, and a dependable healthcare system for all of us. So a fair and sufficient tax system is critically important. The American Rescue Act money is one-time money. It can jumpstart our people's budget. In the long run, we need a state tax system that will sustain it. Back to you, Daniel.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Wendy. And, I would just point out for folks interested in learning more about the People's Budget, we shared some links in the chat/comments that you can go and engage with that document more, and also with the campaign that is growing in support of it. Now, switching gears a bit, I want to invite Tammy to answer a few questions. Tammy, thank you for joining us first off. And, so much of your awesome organizing work, really does focus in on, one of the key planks here, looking at care for caregivers. And these folks are essential workers. Guidance from the American Rescue Plan says lawmakers can invest to make sure that we provide premium pay for essential workers in our care economy. Could you share why that is so important?
Sure, Daniel. As we think about restarting our economy, post-pandemic, we know that high quality childcare is essential, especially for our early learners. Childcare is a critical infrastructure for our economy, and it helps parents stay in the workforce. We can't begin to restart our economy until we address the childcare crisis that's currently happening, especially here in Ohio. Currently, the average hourly wage for childcare workers is about $10.65. And just frankly, we need better care for our care workers. They're essential workers that tend to be predominantly women of color. They deserve dignity in their wages. And, they also need to be whole at work. They also have families, that they are supporting. They have worked on the front lines of the pandemic, keeping our economy afloat, and it's time for us to support them with living wages.
Thank you for that, Tammy. Another part of your advocacy work has been around House Bill 145, and that looks at eligibility for publicly funded childcare. What should people know about this legislation and why it's important?
Oh, wow. So currently in Ohio, if you're a single parent and you have 2 kids and you make $15 an hour, you are not eligible for publicly funded childcare. In Cincinnati, we call them daycare vouchers, but you're not eligible. And so just think about, what folks can really do with $15 an hour, how they can sustain a family. House Bill 145 would increase accessibility up to 200%, meaning that a single parent, also with 2 kids in the household, making up to $40,000 a year could now be eligible for child care benefits. That's a huge game changer. That really helps families, especially people and women impacted by the cliff effect. That provides stability to families, that would help us restart our economy, as well as provide stability to a lot of child care providers that are definitely showing lower enrollment rates since the pandemic. We've seen that across Ohio. So many child care facilities have had to close due to low enrollment rates and not being able to sustain, right? So this is a huge, this particular legislation is huge for both parents as well as for child care providers. It helps to provide some much needed stability, and this is the time to do it. It's been fun, the money is there to do it from ARP. And so, we need to make sure that these industries recover, and this is the time to stand up and speak out on these particular issues in this legislation.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I hear you, and I think especially that point around what brings our communities and our families, working families, stability is so real. I hear in so many conversations with folks that there's just so much uncertainty still. So that's vital. Next up, Taylor. Also, again, thank you again for joining us. In your work, you talk a lot about the Fair School Funding Plan. If you could share what that plan would do for a city like your hometown of Lima, and more broadly for Ohio.
Awesome. So the Fair School Funding Plan, what that does is ultimately and simply put, is it fully and fairly funds the school districts. The most disadvantaged school districts, which are the inner city school districts, they will benefit the most because they are the most disadvantaged. What the school funding plan does is it allows the school districts to rely less on the property taxes, and the state will pay their fair share of the portion of education. When school districts are relying on property taxes, it just innately puts lower income areas at a disadvantage. I mean, that's just simply put, that's just numbers, it's common sense. And what you see in these inner city school districts is you see a higher rate of children dropping out of school. And so to speak specifically to Lima, you see a higher rate of children dropping out of school and not graduating. You see a higher poverty rate in Lima. You see, I work very closely with families directly impacted by the criminal legal system. I work very closely with teachers, and there are a large number of teachers here in Lima who take on second jobs just to fund their classroom necessities, right? That time that they have to spend not in the classroom, worried about their bills, those are vital times that they could be spending in one-on-one sessions with students. There's a lot of different elements in Lima where children are lacking. And as I hear elected officials speak, we just came off of a primary for a mayoral race. Everybody's initiatives are always revolving around children, putting our kids first. How do we pour more into our children? Well, for me, the Fair School Funding Plan is where it starts. If we can look at adequately funding our schools as a way to prevent crime and poverty and that type of thing, that will largely decrease the number of children that you see going into the criminal legal system. We also live in a city that has no community pool, no shopping center. Our only shopping center that we have is closing this summer. There is very limited amount of houses here in Lima. So I'm kind of getting into some other elements outside of school, but understanding that pouring more money into the school districts will create more jobs, right? Because it creates more guidance counselors, it creates more athletic teachers, it creates more jobs, and it creates an opportunity for children to actually thrive. I spoke with a teacher recently, and I just asked, what does a fully and funded school look like to you? And he said, not having to cut our gifted program. You know, this is a school that had to cut their gifted program, which, you know, how important is it to acknowledge children for their accomplishments, you know, and different things like that. I've also worked very closely with the mental health specialist who has acknowledged the need to address PTSD very early in children at school. They won't implement a program because they don't have the funding. So a lot of these different things directly affect the children going into and coming out of our school system. So I want to share a story with you guys about some of the things that I've seen. There is a young man who was in the 11th grade, and he was asked to read in front of the classroom. This young man in 11th grade, he was only reading at a 6th grade level. Now, the teacher may have been overworked, burnt out, tired, frustrated, may have lacked some sensitivity training, cultural training, whatever it was, but she proceeded to overly assert her demand for this young man to read in front of the classroom, as the students are now hackling at him. This young man walked out of the classroom, never returned. He dropped out of school. He ended up robbing a pizza store and was able to come out with a little less than $100. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison. This happened about in April. So can you show that picture again, Daniel?
Sure thing.
This young man was 17 years old. He is now 18 years old, and he is going to be spending the next 30 years in prison. I am 32 years old. I will have to live 2 lifetimes to ignore what he is now sentenced to in prison. So I share this story, right, because there's so many different ways that the school system and institution could have intervened. Where are the guidance counselors in the schools? We don't have them in Lima City schools. Where are the one-on-one opportunities for teachers to have with these students? There are none, because our teachers are having to focus on being able to fund their classrooms. So there are so many different things that this Fair School Funding Plan will benefit, and I just speak directly to that situation because it's one that's very close to my heart. But if you want to get involved or find out more about the Fair School Funding Plan, you can go to All In Ohio, and I believe there's a link for that. There's also a petition that we have going around. I believe there's a link for that as well. Please make sure you are signing that petition and sharing that petition out. We can win this. We can actually definitely push this through. Our funding system has been declared unconstitutional for 24 years, as Wendy mentioned earlier. Too long. And if we really want to give our children a chance and see Ohio progress, we have to start with our children. Like, I cannot stress enough how important passing this plan is. So please sign the petition, share the petition, and we are also hosting advocacy nights every Tuesday that will allow all of us to come into the same space so that we can push the petition out, so that we can call our senators, and so that we can provide testimony. I'm going to pass it back to you, Daniel.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Taylor. I'll tell you, you took me back because, you know, I started my career as a teacher in Lorraine City schools, and, you know, worked actually in a building where we were working with students transitioning between Ohio Detention Youth Services and Lorraine City schools. So, you know, this hits close to home. So definitely want to shout out, please do sign that petition. I think we do, you know, owe it to all of our children to make sure that we provide fair funding and ensure opportunities for brighter future. With that, I'm going to pivot to Will. Just want to shout out and thank you also for being a recurring guest in this series. I guess if you could talk a little bit more on the work that you have led on kinship care and food aid during this budget legislative session. One, it's so vital, but if you could share, what's at stake for Ohioans and your vision of a budget that lifts up the dignity of all Ohioans, that'd be great.
Thank you. I think I'll start with the question around my vision. It's really simple. We must make sure that all of us, regardless of our race, class, our zip code, we must make sure that all of us can live with basic human dignity and just have that basic security and stability as a foundation. I think the People's Budget talks about it as like, we need a budget that cares for all of us, no exceptions. So again, it's a really simple vision, but I think about like what's at stake. I mean, Taylor up with that young man. People's lives are at stake. This is literally the future of our state is about people. It's about our communities, about our schools. It's about childcare system that Tammy lifted up. About basic health care for people in our state. So there's a lot at stake. When I think about the pandemic and the recession, it's completely upended life in our state. The Ohio Department of Job and Family Services put out statistics on the number of unemployment claims that have been made since the beginning of the recession. The most recent report, there's been over 3.3 million initial unemployment claims. That's more unemployment claims than the previous 6 years combined. So, there's a lot of people struggling. I mentioned at the beginning, roughly 1 in 4 adults are in Ohio are expressing in just like meeting basic family budget needs, the usual household expenses. So that means hundreds of thousands of our neighbors are struggling to put food on the table, to pay the rent, to afford to just support their family. So I think this is why our state budget matters. This is why the American Rescue Plan Act and federal relief really matters. The choices and investments that we make now have a real impact. And it's also why our choices, instead of more tax giveaways to the wealthiest Ohioans, we're calling on state lawmakers to ensure that the wealthiest Ohioans really contribute to make sure that all of us can recover, that all of us can thrive. So that's like a big picture. I don't know if you want me to get into the work on hunger and kinship, but yeah, there's a lot at stake.
Awesome. Thank you, Will. And I guess as a follow-up question, and this is something we were both part of yesterday, we held a training with our friends at the Ohio Association of Food Banks and North Ohioans for Budget Legislative Equality. If you could maybe share some highlights from that and ideas on what folks viewing this could do to make an impact in this budget session.
Yeah, so I think one of my biggest takeaways from that discussion yesterday was about the power of collective action. So we talked about when people come together, when people demand change and speak with one voice, we can win. We can actually advance policies, advance budget priorities that make these real differences in people's lives. So I think, to me, the thing that kind of came up was, it reminded me of the Margaret Mead quote, never doubt that a small group of people can change the world. It's the only thing that ever has. So we both on that call talked about, the power of all of us working together and speaking together. But we also set aside the time to actually put that in action. Like, what does it look like? And what does speaking up look like? So, one thing that I'm going to share now from the call yesterday was a tool. We asked folks on the call to weigh in on the state budget. And so we'll share a link in the chat. But basically, we, again, we're calling for a budget that cares for all of us, no exceptions. And so this call tool makes it really easy to call lawmakers. And I'll scroll down here. We're directly asking people to call their state senators. And so we have 10 leaders of the state Senate and also the Senate Finance Committee. It makes it really easy. A couple talking points here. We carved out 10 minutes, and I ended up talking with an aide from the Senate President's office, Senate President Huffman. Also talked to an aide from Senator McCauley's office. But we also have talking points here. So if you want to talk specifically on food and nutrition and the need to invest $45 million per year in the food banks, we've got kind of a little bit of a script to help you have these conversations. And, the feedback from the call was people thought it was really fun and easier than they thought it would be. I also was really impressed with the tool. So yeah, certainly one of the big calls to action was, let's be calling lawmakers now. We're expecting to what's called a Senate substitute bill. So this will be the first version of this bill in the Senate early next week. And so now's a great time for folks all across the state to call in and make our priorities known to shape what's actually going to be in the budget and what those priorities are.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Will. And this, I don't know, thinking about collective action, thinking about yesterday's training and just the energy that I got from, it's been a while since I've been at a phone bank, especially with the challenges of the pandemic. So doing that virtually was really awesome. And I'd love to hear maybe from folks on the panel, if you have maybe a prior experience that really had you feeling great about taking action together, or if you'd also just like to lift up any actions that folks can take. I think this would be a great time to replug those. I think, we have some links in the chat, but if anyone would like to share their experience of a powerful action, that'd be great.
I'm sorry, I'll go.
Go for it.
Okay. So, and I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back till Selma. I'm going to go back because as a organizer, whenever I am feeling maybe a little discouraged or just kind of looking for some type of respark, I literally do go back to that organizing that took place in Selma during the civil rights movement, when Martin Luther King and all the other grassroots organizations, they were organizing around making sure that Black people actually, they already had the right to vote. However, there were different systems set in place that were still allowing them to not be able to register to vote. And they organized and they had a lot of different strategies. Media was one, different other techniques was one. But I always go back to that movie. So I just kind of want to go back to that and lift that time in history up as a powerful encouragement for me whenever I do feel a little discouraged around advocacy. But it does work. There's so many other different times and testimony I can have. What took place in Cincinnati this past election, turning the city from red to blue, you know what I mean? Turning over those judges' seats and all of those things. It was just truly amazing and encouraging and empowering to see what organizing, what advocacy, what dedication, and what really putting your feet to the pavement really means. I got a new idea of what power of the people really means during that time in Cincinnati. So again, I do want to plug our every Tuesday night advocacy trainings. We are holding those for the next 3 weeks, really pressuring the Senate to pass the fair school funding formula. Like I said earlier, this is something that we absolutely can do. We just need the people, we need the numbers, and we need the dedication to our children. So that advocacy, and there's a link, if you guys have the link, to drop the link to register for that, and also the petition as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Taylor. And you just made me think of, especially with that historical frame and understanding, I've been loving reading the graphic novel series with my daughter, March, that was authored by, the late, great Congressman John Lewis, icon in civil rights movement and inspiration for me. But I think recently, in terms of having marches and having rallies, we were, I do work with Northeast Ohio's Worker Center, and we were part of a May Day rally and march just this past May 1st. And I think, that gives me goosebumps getting back into the community, doing things again in a safe, social distance way, and ways in which we can, lift up our collective voice and get into some good trouble. Would anyone else like to share any examples or opportunities?
I don't have an opportunity is to use Will's toolkit and to sign up for Taylor's advocacy. It's hard to do it alone. And for many of us, this has been a very lonely year. We have been isolated with our computers maybe, or with, our closest family members. So it's going to take a lot of will, I think, for us to break out of sitting in our home afraid of the virus. But this is a good opportunity and excuse to get out. So as the public health order end, which I have been afraid of, I realize this is an opportunity for me to go back and work with the people in my parish about plans for my community. And so this is giving me a reason to embrace the new openness instead of to fear it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Wendy. One other upcoming day, and I'm not sure if I don't know that we have a link yet, but there will be another direct action training that will be similar to the one that Will and I helped with yesterday on our Dignity for All coalition. That'll be coming up June 21st. Will, did you have anything you wanted to add on that?
Yeah, just, we're going to be following the budget closely. As I mentioned, the substitute bill, the Senate substitute bill is coming out this early next week. We've heard that it'll be passed out of the full Ohio Senate the following week on June 10th. And by law, the governor has to sign the budget into law by the end of June, so June 30th. So before it goes to the governor, it goes to what's called the conference committee. So there's 3 lawmakers in the House, 3 lawmakers in the Senate that kind of come together to hash out the differences between the version and the Senate budget version. And so partly on June 21st, it's an opportunity to, again, speak with one voice, as members of the conference committee, but also if there are provisions that could be harmful for people in our communities, we'll also want to call to veto potentially certain provisions. So again, that's going to be June 21st at 1 o'clock. We don't have the link at this moment, but we'll share it to the different chat threads later on today. So certainly invite to join us for that. Oh, and I also wanted to acknowledge the call to action for the phone call tool. We worked really closely with the Ohio Association of Food Banks on that. So want to thank the food banks for all their work to help put that tool together.
Awesome. Thank you, Will. Any other tools or calls to action folks want to share or lift up? All right. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. I want to thank all of our panelists so much. Before we close, I'd also just like to share that we will have our 5th and final session of this live stream series on Thursday, June 10th. So we're going to have a week off. But when we come back, we will discuss the American Rescue Plan and essential workers. It should be another great conversation, so don't miss it. Please be sure to sign up for our e-news and to like, follow, and subscribe to our accounts for future notifications and how to get involved in Ohio's policy conversation. And again, just thank you so much for watching Policy Matters Now. And remember, your voice matters. Thanks. Have a